Caroline Rivett. I'm going to be talking about security in the medical Internet of Things. What I'd like you to do as I talk is to think about some of the concepts which we heard in the previous talk and some of those amazing illustrations which we saw, and start thinking about those with regard to what I'm talking about in terms of the medical Internet of Things. So I'm Caroline Rivett. I'm with KPMG, and my focus is cybersecurity in healthcare and in pharmaceuticals. I've been with KPMG about a year now, and one of the key things I've learned is how cybersecurity awareness in hospitals, in healthcare, in medicine, is actually way behind a number of industry sectors. And one of the things I'd like to do by attending a forum like today is to be able to, it's almost a call to arms. We need your help in terms of helping us in medicine, in healthcare, in terms of building in better security. So cybersecurity in life sciences and healthcare, it's increasingly a concern. In the States, we're hearing of medical records being stolen from Anthem, and they're being used for identity theft. And we're also hearing of them being stolen because of their credit card details with them, but also social security numbers. I'm going to go right back to basics here, because I think this is important when we talk about the medical Internet of Things. Real basics in terms of what actually is security. Three aspects to security, as you all know. There's the confidentiality aspect. Confidentiality in medicine is important. It's very important. But it's not as important as the other two areas. So in terms of confidentiality, do I mind if people know that I'm A positive blood type? Perhaps not. But I might mind if my genetic information is shared or changed. In terms of availability, does it matter if my medical records aren't available? It probably does matter a little bit, but many hospitals, many clinicians have been dealing with this over the past 20 years or so on for a long time, when medical records, static medical records, haven't been available. So perhaps not such a great issue. But in terms of integrity, integrity is really, really key in terms of security in medicine, in healthcare. Because if information is changed, if my A positive blood type is changed to a type 0, then that has an impact to me, has an impact if I walk out there and get run over by a car and they infuse me with the wrong blood type. So that's at quite a simplistic level in terms of medical records. But as we move into this medical Internet of Things, if information starts being changed, again, it can have a major impact. I'm going to talk through some of the key aspects in the medical Internet of Things, both in terms of patients, but in terms of home care, and then I'll move on to the hospital aspect as well. And when I talk about hospitals, I'm also going to be talking about some of the security vulnerabilities which have been found. So in terms of digital health is becoming a very big thing in healthcare. It's a very, very exciting time of change. You've got increasing consumerization. You've got patients wearing wearable devices. You've got data flows from wearable devices up into phones and then up into people's health records. And so increasing focus upon the patients and increasing movement towards actually the quantified self, being able to measure information and data from patients' bodies. In terms of medical technology, lots of exciting changes here to do with technology. And I use the term technology specifically rather than devices. Devices has a very special meaning because it means to be able to treat a patient, to be able to rely upon the information. And we've got medical technology, including wearable devices, including sensors, including watches, including being able to analyze people's breath to see if they're sick. You've then got implantables, and we're seeing numbers of examples of security researchers focusing upon implantables. And here you've got insulin pumps, pacemakers. You've got also replacement bones and joints. So lots of sensors within these actual devices. We're also seeing lots of research and lots of people looking at injectables, smart pills. And so one of my clients, they've got a sensor-enabled smart pill, which you ingest. It's powered off the stomach acid, and then it sends radio waves onto sensors on your skin, and then up onto a phone. And that way you can measure how well that drug is actually being infused, whether it's being taken at the right times, whether there's contraindications going on. Now, just imagine if some of that information was changed. And then in terms of robotics, we're very increasing use of robotics within hospitals, and we're seeing instances where you've got professionals in one country directing a robot in another country and doing surgery on people. So various applications of the Internet of Things in healthcare. I talked about the pills. You've also got cardiac activity monitoring, which will measure your heart rate and how fast your heart is beating. You've also got dispensation of medication, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. All of this enables you to be able to remotely collect information and then to be able to make decisions on it. In terms of the shape of things to come, you've got a patient lying in hospital. You can measure their pulse, their oxygen levels. You can measure their body temperature. I've talked about the pills. You can measure how much they're sweating. Lots of measurements going on. You can measure their heart rate. And now, increasingly, you'll be able to not only measure the heart rate, but to be able to actually change the heart rate. Now, again, imagine the damage you could do with that if you were able to change that. And an interesting illustration of that, of course, was Donald Rumsfeld when they switched off the Wi-Fi when he had his pacemaker put in because of the security implications. One asks the question, why don't they sort out the security for all pacemakers rather than just Donald Rumsfeld? But that's by the by. So in terms of the home, we had some beautiful illustrations just now about some of the usages of the Internet of Things in the home. But in the future, we're going to be able to have pollen sensors sitting in the garden measuring pollen count for those of us who've got hay fever. Temperature sensors on the roof, which will measure temperature and what the weather's doing. And then in terms of having the scales, I question why you want to have Internet Wi-Fi-enabled scales. And then somebody lying at home in bed, sick, you're able to measure how well they're responding to treatment and there they are dreaming of going abroad. I've intentionally made this slide quite busy because I think it's important because as soon as you start having all of these sensors in the home, having the connected home, I suspect it's going to get very, very messy. And with the messiness comes problems and security issues and security vulnerabilities. So in terms of the Internet of Things ecosystem, you've got the various devices on people's bodies measuring, but also increasingly devices which can actually perform an action. You've got the flow of data coming up from the wearable devices up into people's home and then held on within the cloud, data centers within the cloud, and of course no security implications of the cloud. In hospitals, you've got medical devices which are taking information and again potentially feeding it up into cloud. None of this is inherently secure at the moment. So we've been hearing about vulnerabilities, and the FDA issued an advisory earlier on this year, a couple of advisories about some of the vulnerabilities which were being found in insulin, which were being found relating to hospital devices. Now, we see vulnerabilities in pacemakers, in insulin pumps, and also in robotics. And we haven't yet really seen any vulnerabilities in the smart pills, but there's some very clever people out there, so I'm sure that they would find them. But let's talk about some of those actual vulnerabilities. So we've got security researchers which are looking at at the devices in the hospitals, and we've had the FDA, which has published the advisories, and some very, very simple things are being found. They're finding hard-coded passwords. They're finding that the easy-to-guess passwords 1, 2, 3, 4, admin, very, very easy to guess passwords. They're finding that they're open ports, port 20, port 23, port 8443, and those aren't being actually monitored. They're also finding that you've got Bluetooth-enabled defibrillators. But also one of the other aspects is that you're finding that the medical devices are connected onto the corporate internet. And so when a salesman of some of these devices come along, they will say to the clinicians, hey, we've got something really great here, which will help the patients, and then they'll plug it into the actual hospital network. And so very, very low level of security awareness within the clinicians, within the clinical staff. We're also, of course, because of that, the security implications haven't really been designed in. It's all very, very far behind, very similar situation to, it's very far behind. So in terms of the security standards and regulations, we think they're actually quite lax and more needs to be done. And I think one of the things for me speaking in front of you today is that, again, it's a call to arms. We need to actually start focusing and concentrating on this area. Some of the technical challenges which you've heard of today and which you're aware of, you've got very small devices with limited hardware protection, limited capabilities, very unsophisticated operating systems, using wireless, and also the legacy protocols. So somebody's come up with a great idea a number of years ago, and then it's been built on, but the security implications of that haven't actually been thought about. In terms of user authentication, it's often a piece of hardware attached to something, and then the authentication hasn't been thought about, hasn't been designed in. And then right at the back end, again, you've got some quite insecure applications supporting this. In terms of the automotive industry, a number of my colleagues have been doing quite a lot of work within the automotive industry and working with the various suppliers. And from my discussions with them, this seems to be, this is a pioneer in terms of the applications around this and in terms of building in security. And we've seen the illustrations and we've heard the news about hackers being able to hack into a Jeep and to be able to stop it as it's running. And some of my colleagues have been working on that. Very, very real risks there in terms of health and safety taking over control. And again, we've got health and safety issues, of course, within the Internet of Things and medical devices. In terms of privacy, where were you last night? You said you were in the supermarket, but I know where you were. And then in terms of fraud, we're highlighting issues to do with people being over the speed limit. And they're saying, no, of course we weren't. But for insurance purposes, of course, you can prove that they were. So there are lots of, I think, learnings which you can take from the automotive industry and to be able to start building them into the medical sector as well. So in terms of that, what I've seen is that there are a couple of key vulnerabilities which are key aspects of which are being highlighted in terms of vulnerabilities. The first on the bottom right is where you can use hospital medical devices because of their very poor security as a vector to be able to then get into the hospital network, to be able to then pass in and be able to access medical records, people's medical information, potentially change it, potentially take the information from it. Alternatively, look at the corporate information within the hospital network as well. But I think the most serious aspect relates to medical devices such as insulin pumps, such as pacemakers, which could then be changed. The pump information being able to change, so then you can deliver a fatal dosage. And of course, that has really, really severe impacts upon the person involved. Now, that specific example was a proof of concept, and there have been a number of proof of concepts demonstrating this. We also, but it's a similar sort of thing relating to the HOSPIRA FDA advisory as well. So in terms of standards and regulations, I think there are three aspects of the regulations. The regulators are finding it very hard to keep up here, as is often the case. You've got the European Union who are doing quite a bit of work in terms of actually defining what is a medical device and how it should be protected and what you need to build into medical devices. And there are a number of directives around that. In the UK, you've got the MHRA, and their focus has very much been upon the known knowns rather than the unknowns. And so they're still struggling to understand, they're still struggling to keep up with the various innovations within the Internet of Things, within connected devices. In the FDA, they seem to be further ahead than the MHRA and the European Commission, and they're starting to focus upon this area increasingly. Listening to a member of the FDA last week, she was highlighting a number of aspects. She was highlighting that they're trying to change their culture, so they're trying to listen more to security researchers such as yourselves to highlight and take those into account. They view it as increasingly important to work with the security researchers and the manufacturers. Other key aspects she was highlighting was the absolute importance of design and designing security into the medical devices and designing the overall ecosystem so then there are no flaws in that ecosystem. And then in terms of testing. So this is an area where the regulators are struggling to keep up and where they really need assistance and help to try and take this forward and trying to drive this forward. So in terms of what actually can we do, I think one of the key aspects is to understand what is it within the medical Internet of Things we are trying to protect. What is it that is at risk? What is it that is important out there? Clearly, medical devices which are delivering a drug dosage or which are measuring our drug dosages are important and they need to be protected. Increasing drive towards standardization rather than reinvention, and the move to be able to have better standards over this. But I think one of the absolute key aspects is to be able to work with the regulators and for forums such as yourselves to be able to take up the baton and to work with the regulators to be able to address some of these issues. Because this is important. This is about people's health and it's about people's treatment. And we can't move forward into this exciting new Internet of Things and connected health if we don't have trust in the information and we don't trust that the devices will work and work effectively. So thank you very much.